I never wanted to take the night shift at Millbrook Storage. The pay was better, sure, but something about the sprawling maze of corridors lined with identical metal doors always felt wrong after dark. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly pale glow that never quite reached the corners. 6 months I'd been working here, and still I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were just a little too deep, a little too watchful. Tonight marked my 3rd consecutive night shift this week. The regular night guard, Peterson, had called in sick again, 3rd time this month. Food poisoning, he'd claimed, but the tremor in his voice suggested something else entirely, something he wasn't willing to talk about. Just 12 units left to check, I muttered to myself, the sound of my voice providing fleeting comfort in the oppressive silence. The night manager's keys jingled against my hip as I walked, each step echoing down the concrete hallway far longer than it should have. The sound waves seemed to stretch, distorting as they traveled, returning to my ears as something almost resembling whispers. The facility had originally been built in the 1950s as a government storage facility before being converted to civilian use in the 80s. The older sections still had that Cold War feel, reinforced walls, heavy doors, the faint smell of old metal and secrets. Management never talked about what used to be stored here, and longtime employees changed the subject whenever new hires asked. Tonight felt different, colder. The air carried a faint smell I couldn't quite place, something earthy and damp like old wet leaves or soil after rain. My flashlight beam trembled slightly as I approached Section D, the oldest part of the facility, built into what used to be a basement level of some forgotten factory. My predecessor had warned me about D section when I first started. "Just do your checks quick and get out," he'd said, never elaborating on why. The lights in Section D always buzzed a different pitch than the rest of the building, a half-tone lower, like an instrument, slightly out of tune with the orchestra. The concrete walls here were bare, unlike the painted ones in the newer sections, and seemed to absorb sound in a way that made even my breathing sound muffled and distant to my own ears. Click, click, click. I tested each padlock methodically, marking them off on my clipboard. The routine usually calmed my nerves, but tonight, each metallic sound seemed to echo back from somewhere it shouldn't, as if something was mimicking me from deep within the complex. I paused, holding my breath. The clicking continued for 2 more beats after I'd stopped. My hand instinctively went to the pepper spray on my belt. Useless against whatever was happening here, but the solid feel of it against my palm provided some small comfort. The security cameras didn't extend to this section, another peculiarity management refused to address when questioned. I'd nearly convinced myself it was just my imagination when I heard it, the subtle scrape of something heavy being dragged across concrete, far down the corridor, then silence. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees in an instant. My breath fogged in front of my face, though it was mid-July and the building had no air conditioning in the older sections. As I rounded the corner to the final corridor, I noticed the light fixture at the far end was out, leaving the hallway half swallowed by darkness. My throat tightened. I could have sworn all lights were functioning during yesterday's inspection. In the darkness, something seemed to shift. Not a movement you could see, but one you could feel, like the subtle change in air pressure before a storm. The darkness appeared to have texture, layers that folded and unfolded as I stared. For a brief moment, I thought I saw faces pressing forward from within it. Their features stretched and distorted as if pushing against a membrane that separated their reality from mine. The air grew heavier with each step toward the darkness. My radio crackled once with static, then fell silent. When I tried to call the front desk, I got nothing but dead air. I knew protocol. Equipment failure meant returning to the security office immediately. but something pulled me forward, a compulsion I couldn't explain or resist. 5 doors left. 4. 3. The darkness seemed to pulse at the end of the hall. Not just an absence of light, but something with weight and substance. My flashlight beam weakened, the batteries suddenly failing, though I'd just replaced them at the start of my shift. The light flickered, revealing brief glimpses of the corridor ahead. And in one of those stuttering flashes, I could have sworn I saw someone standing at the far end, watching me. Their form was wrong somehow. Proportions stretched, limbs too long, head tilted at an impossible angle. My heart hammered against my ribs as the light stabilized momentarily. The corridor was empty again. The concrete beneath my feet vibrated subtly, as if vast machinery was operating somewhere far below. I'd never been told what was under Section D, or if the building even had sub-basements. 2 doors left. The jingling of the keys against my hip had stopped, though I hadn't touched them. They hung motionless, as if gravity had decided to take a break. When I reached down to touch them, they felt unnaturally warm, almost hot against my fingertips. My watch had stopped as well, the second hand frozen precisely at midnight, though it had been 11:47 when I'd entered Section D. The air smelled increasingly of ozone and copper, like electrical fires and old blood. I felt lightheaded, my thoughts becoming sluggish and strange. Part of me recognized I should turn back, but that part seemed increasingly distant, like a voice calling from another room. The final door, number D121. Unlike the others, this lock was already open, hanging loosely on the latch. My clipboard showed no record of this unit being rented. According to our system, D121 didn't even exist. I flipped through the pages again, checking twice. The numbering jumped from D120 to D122, and yet here it was, solid and real before me. A door with the numbers D121 stenciled in fading black paint. I remembered the stories that occasionally circulated among the day shift workers. Rumors of night guards who had disappeared during their shifts, their cars left in the parking lot, their final clockout never recorded. Management always explained these away as employees who had simply walked off the job, but now I wondered if there was something more sinister at play. I should have called my supervisor. I should have walked away. Instead, I found myself reaching for the handle, fingers closing around cold metal that felt somehow alive beneath my touch. It pulsed once, like a heart beating against my palm. The metal seemed to yield slightly under pressure, more like flesh than steel. The door swung open with no sound at all. Beyond it lay not a storage unit, but a long corridor, stretching impossibly far, farther than the building's dimensions should allow. The walls were lined with more doors, hundreds of them, each identical to the one I'd just opened. The lights here were different, not the harsh fluorescence of the main facility, but old incandescent bulbs that emitted a warm amber glow, swinging slightly as if disturbed by an unfelt breeze. The corridor curved gently downward, descending in a spiral that made no architectural sense. The walls were the same concrete as the main building, but here they were marked with strange symbols, etched directly into the surface. Circles containing intricate geometric patterns, lines of text in no language I could recognize. From somewhere in that impossible distance came the sound of keys jingling, followed by footsteps echoing on concrete. Then I saw it, a beam of light sweeping methodically across the doors, and the silhouette of someone checking locks, someone who moved exactly the way I do. I called out, my voice sounding flat and dimensionless in the strange acoustics of the corridor. The figure paused, its flashlight beam swinging in my direction. For a brief moment, the light illuminated its face, my face, looking back at me with an expression of equal parts horror and resignation. I stepped backward, vasculitis, but the door to the real world was gone. Behind me now was just another corridor with countless more doors. In the distance, I could make out another version of myself, flashlight in hand, working methodically through his rounds. Panic surged through me as I ran to the nearest door, yanking it open only to find another corridor beyond, identical to the one I stood in. I tried another door and another, each revealing the same endless passageway, the same rows of doors stretching to infinity. Some corridors contained versions of myself at different stages of realization, some just beginning their rounds, others frantically trying doors as I was, and still others sitting defeated against the walls, having given up entirely. How long I searched, I cannot say. Time feels different here. My watch still reads midnight, though I've experienced what feels like days, maybe weeks of wandering these halls. I've tried counting doors, tracking my path, looking for patterns in the symbols etched into the walls. Sometimes I encounter other versions of myself. Some acknowledge me with a nod of grim understanding. Others look through me as if I'm not there at all. Now I understand. There are no storage units, there never were, just doors. And behind each one, another version of me, caught in the same loop, checking locks that don't protect anything, never finding the last door that leads out. Occasionally, I find notes scratched into the walls, warnings left by myself from other loops. Some I recognize as my own handwriting, others slightly different, as if written by versions of me from alternate timelines. They all say variations of the same thing. D121 is not the last door. The last door is still ahead. I've started leaving my own messages now, warnings to myself, instructions on how to navigate the ever-shifting labyrinth. I've even begun to develop a theory that there might indeed be a way out, a particular sequence of doors that, if opened in the correct order, might break the loop. I still do my rounds. I still check the locks. But I know the truth now. Night shift never ends here. And sometimes, when I shine my light just right, I can see you through the crack under the door, getting ready to start your first night on the job. I want to warn you, but I know you won't listen. No version of me ever does. If you're watching this, you're already part of the loop. But perhaps you'll be the one to find the last door, the real last door, and break the cycle for all of us trapped in Millbrook's endless corridors. Like, subscribe, and comment below with what you'd do if you found a door that shouldn't exist. Your answer might be the key I've been searching for all this time. The midnight bus to Westfield is always empty this time of year. That's why I take it, just me, the driver, and 40 miles of unlit country road cutting through dense forest. No cell reception, no roadside stops, just the hypnotic sound of tires on asphalt and the occasional flicker of the overhead reading light that never quite worked right. I've made this journey every Friday night for 3 years now, ever since Mom moved to the care facility just outside of Westfield. The daytime buses are crowded, full of tourists heading to the Lake District beyond the town. But the midnight route, that's for locals who know the shortcuts and night workers with nowhere else to be. Most nights, it's just me and Cal, the regular driver, a man of few words but dependable timing. We had an understanding, Cal and I. No small talk, just a nod of acknowledgement and the comfortable silence of familiar strangers. Tonight was different. I felt it the moment I stepped on board and saw the driver, not our regular guy, but someone new. His face remained half hidden beneath his cap, but his hands on the steering wheel seemed too pale, fingers too long. They gripped the wheel with an unsettling rigidity, knuckles protruding sharply beneath nearly translucent skin. "Evening," he said without turning around, his voice like gravel under ice. The single word seemed to hang in the air unnaturally, as if the acoustics inside the bus had somehow changed. I nodded silently and took my usual seat near the back, pressing my forehead against the cool window glass as we pulled away from the station. The station's fluorescent lights receded behind us, swallowed quickly by the unusual density of the fog that had settled over the town. I hadn't noticed it earlier when I'd walked to the bus stop, but now it seemed to envelop the vehicle, reducing visibility to just a few yards beyond the headlights. The familiar buildings at the edge of town appeared distorted through the mist, their outlines blurring and shifting as if they weren't quite solid. The radio, which Cal usually kept on low volume, classic rock or occasionally late-night talk shows, remained silent. The only sound was the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers fighting against a dampness that seemed to come from nowhere as no rain was falling. I checked my watch, 12:17 a.m. The journey to Westfield usually took exactly 53 minutes. I always timed it. 20 minutes into the journey, I noticed we'd missed our turn. The familiar route through pine groves had been replaced by a narrow road I didn't recognize, flanked by twisted oak trees whose branches clawed at the night sky. Their silhouettes resembled gnarled fingers against the strange grayish glow that had replaced the normal darkness of night. The fog had taken on an almost luminous quality, reflecting the bus headlights back in a way that created disorienting patterns across the windshield. "Excuse me?" I called out. "I think we're going the wrong way." The driver didn't respond. His shoulders remained perfectly still, as if he hadn't heard me or perhaps wasn't breathing at all. The back of his neck, visible just above his collar, showed skin with an unusual texture, dry and flaked in places with a grayish undertone that matched neither living flesh nor natural decay. I tried again, louder this time. "Sir, we missed the turn for Westfield." The interior lights dimmed momentarily, and in that brief darkness, I could have sworn I saw more silhouettes reflected in the windows than there should have been. Just shadows, I told myself, tricks of light on the glass. But when the lights stabilized, they remained dimmer than before, casting the empty seats in pools of murky shadow. I reached for my phone out of habit, though I knew there would be no signal. The screen lit up, showing not the usual lock screen image of my dog, but a solid black display with only the time visible, 12:17 a.m., the same time I'd checked nearly 15 minutes earlier. I tapped the screen, but the time didn't change. The battery indicator showed full charge, then empty, then full again in rapid succession. Outside, the landscape had changed completely. The road now ran alongside what appeared to be an endless field of tall, colorless grass that rippled despite the absence of wind. No houses, no other roads connecting to ours, no distant lights from farms or vehicles, just the narrow strip of asphalt cutting through an impossible expanse that shouldn't exist in this densely populated county. The bus slowed as we approached a bend, and that's when I felt it. A subtle shift in weight, the unmistakable feeling of someone sitting down in the seat beside me. I froze, eyes fixed forward, afraid to turn and look. The temperature around me dropped so suddenly that goosebumps erupted across my skin. My breath caught in my throat as I sensed movement in my peripheral vision. From the corner of my eye, I could see nothing but an empty seat. Yet I felt the pressure of a shoulder against mine, heard the soft sound of breathing that wasn't my own. The cushion beside me depressed as if bearing weight. The vinyl cover creaking slightly under the pressure of something I couldn't see. A scent filled my nostrils like wet earth and old perfume, the distinctive smell of funeral flowers left too long in vases. I fought the urge to bolt from my seat, instinct telling me that acknowledging whatever had joined me would somehow make my situation worse. "We don't get many through passengers these days," the driver suddenly announced, his voice filling the bus though he hadn't turned or raised his volume. Each word seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the vehicle itself were speaking. "Most folks don't make it all the way to the end of the line." The air inside the bus had grown cold enough that I could see my breath forming clouds in front of my face. The windows had fogged over, and as I watched, Invisible fingers began tracing words in the condensation from the outside. The letters formed slowly, methodically, written by a hand pressing against the glass with deliberate pressure. Next stop. Your stop. I didn't pull the cord, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The words seemed to dissipate before they reached the front of the bus, absorbed by the unnatural silence that had settled over everything. The driver chuckled, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Doesn't matter. Some passengers don't choose their stops. Some stops choose their passengers. The pressure beside me increased, the invisible presence leaning closer. Something cold brushed against my hand where it rested on my lap. The sensation of fingers attempting to intertwine with mine. I jerked my hand away, heart pounding so loud I was certain it must be audible throughout the bus. "Who else is on this bus?" I demanded, forcing strength into my voice, though it shook with each word. "Where are you taking me?" "Taking you." The driver's shoulders shook with silent laughter. "Oh, you misunderstand. We're not taking you anywhere. We're bringing you back." The fog outside had thickened to the point where nothing was visible beyond the windows except swirling grayish-white vapors. Yet somehow we continued moving forward, the sensation of motion undeniable, though there were no visual markers to confirm it. The bus lurched suddenly, throwing me forward against the seat in front. When I straightened up, I realized we were no longer moving. Outside my window was nothing but absolute darkness, not the darkness of night, but a perfect void, as if reality itself had been erased beyond the thin barrier of glass. "Last stop," the driver called out, finally turning to face me. The overhead light illuminated empty eye sockets in a face that was more memory than matter, features that seemed to shift and reconfigure with each subtle movement, never quite settling into any recognizable human expression. "Everyone out." That's when I felt cold fingers interlace with mine, the invisible passenger beside me now making solid contact. Though I still couldn't see them, I could feel the gentle tug as they tried to lead me towards the door, which had swung open to reveal nothing but that same perfect darkness. I resisted, pulling back against the unseen force, but my strength seemed to ebb with each passing second. My limbs grew heavy, thoughts sluggish. The cold hand in mine didn't feel threatening anymore. There was something almost comforting in its persistent, gentle pressure. "What happens if I get off?" I managed to ask, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. The driver's face continued its subtle transformations, momentarily settling into a configuration that looked almost sympathetic. "You already know. You've always known. Why else would you take this route every week, always alone, always at midnight?" And suddenly, with horrible clarity, I remembered. The rainy night 3 years ago, the sharp curve on the Westfield Road, headlights in my eyes, the crash. Then darkness. I hadn't been visiting my mother at the care facility. I'd been visiting my own grave. The realization should have terrified me, but instead brought an unexpected sense of peace. The invisible hand tugged again, more insistently this time. I looked down and for a brief moment could see translucent fingers interwoven with mine, my own hand as it had once been before the accident that had left me trapped between worlds. "The others are waiting," the driver said, his voice gentler now. "They've been saving you a seat." I stood slowly, letting my invisible companion guide me toward the open door. As I approached, the darkness beyond began to resolve into shapes. A landscape bathed in soft twilight, filled with familiar figures waiting by the roadside. I recognized them all, passengers who had vanished from the midnight route over the years, each believing as I had that they were still among the living. I'm still on the bus. I will always be on the bus. But sometimes new passengers board at the station, and I sit beside them, holding their hands as the driver takes us all to that last stop beyond the darkness. Some nights, I trace messages in the condensation, trying to warn them, but deep down, I know it doesn't matter. The midnight bus to Westfield always reaches its true destination, regardless of which route it takes to get there. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to hear more stories from routes less traveled. And the next time you're on a late-night bus and feel someone sit beside you in an empty seat, perhaps it's just your imagination, or perhaps I'm finally welcoming you home. Grayson Memorial Hospital's East Wing was supposed to be a straightforward gig. Just a 6-hour night shift watching over a construction site. Easy money, they said. A gutted shell of a building, stripped to concrete and steel, with plastic sheets flapping over doorways like shrouds in the wind. I'd done security jobs before, but something about this place felt wrong from the moment I stepped inside. The air was too heavy, the silence too thick, like the building was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The East Wing had been the children's ward until it was shut down 15 years ago, replaced by a shiny new pediatric center across town. Nobody talked much about why it closed, just vague mentions of budget cuts and incidents that never made the papers. My supervisor, a chain-smoking guy named Carl who looked like he hadn't slept in a decade, handed me a clipboard with a map and a digital tracker. 6 rounds, hit the checkpoints, don't touch anything you don't have to, he said, his voice clipped. When I asked what kind of incidents, he just lit another cigarette and walked away. I should have known then. The way Carl avoided my eyes, the way the other guards at the briefing kept their heads down. It wasn't just another job, but the pay was double my usual rate and I had bills piling up. So at 10 p.m. I clocked in, strapped the tracker to my belt, and started my first round. The hospital smelled of dust and something sharper, like old antiseptic left to fester. My boots echoed on the bare concrete, each step sounding louder than it should, like the building was throwing my presence back at me. Checkpoint 1 was at the old reception desk, a skeletal frame of splintered wood and shattered glass. The tracker beeped as I scanned it, a small reassurance in the oppressive quiet. Checkpoint 2 was deeper in, near what used to be a patient intake area. Clear, but as I marked it, I froze. The echoes of my footsteps didn't stop when I did. They continued for 2 more steps, faint but deliberate somewhere behind me. I spun around, flashlight beams slicing through the dark, but the corridor was empty. Just plastic sheets swaying slightly, though there was no breeze. "Get a grip, Mark," I muttered to myself. My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the walls. I'd heard stories about old hospitals, how they held on to pain, how the suffering of patients could linger like a stain. I didn't believe in ghosts, not really. But Grayson Memorial was testing that conviction. The air was changing, growing heavier, and that antiseptic smell was stronger now, mixed with something sour, like spoiled milk. By the 3rd checkpoint at the former nurses' station, the unease had settled into my bones. The station was a wreck, overturned chairs, papers scattered across the floor, some yellowed with age, others oddly pristine, as if someone had been here recently. My flashlight flickered, the beam dimming without warning, barely cutting through the shadows. I tapped it against my palm, cursing under my breath. New batteries checked before the shift, no reason for it to fail. That's when I heard it, the soft squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum. Not my boots, something lighter like a nurse's sneakers or a child's. The sound stopped when I did, resuming only when I took another step. My heart thudded against my ribs. "Security," I called out, trying to sound authoritative. "This area's restricted." Silence answered, thick and suffocating. Then a giggle, a child's giggle, high and clear, echoing from somewhere down the darkened hallway. It wasn't playful, it was wrong, like a sound played backward, sharp enough to make my skin crawl. I gripped the pepper spray on my belt, knowing it was useless against whatever this was. Protocol said to investigate potential intruders, but every instinct screamed to run. Instead, I followed the sound, my flashlight flickering worse now, casting erratic shadows that seemed to move on their own. The hallway narrowed, the walls closing in, bare concrete giving way to patches of faded paint, pastel blues and pinks, remnants of the children's ward. I passed a bulletin board, still pinned with crayon drawings, their colors unnaturally vivid in the dim light. One drawing caught my eye. A stick figure in a security uniform surrounded by smaller figures with blank, eyeless faces. The word watchman was scrawled beneath it in red crayon. I tore my eyes away, my breath shallow. The giggle came again, closer now, leading me to a door marked playroom. The door was ajar, a sliver of blue light spilling into the hallway, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. The air was colder here, my breath fogging despite the summer heat outside. The antiseptic smell was overwhelming, mixed with something metallic like old blood. Pushing the door open, I stepped into a room that didn't belong. Unlike the gutted corridors, the playroom was pristine, frozen in time. Colorful walls were decorated with cartoon animals, their eyes too large, too knowing. Toys lined the shelves, stuffed bears, plastic trucks, a doll with one eye missing. Small tables and chairs were arranged in neat rows, as if waiting for children who would never come. In the center stood an ancient film projector, whirring to life as I entered, casting flickering blue light onto the far wall. The projection wasn't a cartoon or an old hospital reel. It showed me, standing in the doorway of this very room, flashlight in hand, staring at the projector. My own image moved in real time, mirroring my every step. I spun around, heart pounding, expecting to see a camera or a trick, but the corridor behind me had changed. The plastic sheets and exposed wiring were gone, replaced by pristine hospital walls, polished linoleum floors, and glowing exit signs that hadn't worked in years. My radio crackled, static bursting through the silence. A child's voice whispered through the noise. "Checkpoint 4 is waiting, Mr. Watchman. You're falling behind schedule." The voice was soft, almost sweet, but it carried a weight that made my knees buckle. I fumbled for the radio, pressing the call button. "This is Mark. Who's on this channel?" No response, just more static, and then another giggle, closer now, as if the speaker was standing right beside me. I checked the map on my clipboard, hands trembling. Checkpoint 4 was in the former ICU at the farthest end of the wing. The map seemed different now, the lines slightly altered, new corridors branching off where none should be. As I made my way toward the ICU, the hospital came alive around me. Doors I'd passed earlier were now closed, soft murmurs leaking from behind them, whispered conversations, the clatter of medical trays, the rhythmic beep of heart monitors. I peered through a small window in one door and saw a room that should have been empty. Instead, it held a small bed, a shape beneath the blanket shifting slightly as if breathing. I stumbled back, my flashlight beam shaking. The murmurs grew louder, overlapping into a chorus of voices, none distinct, but all urgent. I forced myself to keep moving, passing more rooms, each with its own sounds. Soft crying, the scrape of a chair, a faint lullaby sung in a language I didn't recognize. The pastel walls were no longer bare. They were covered in more drawings, all depicting the same eyeless children, their hands reaching out. The word watchman scrawled repeatedly in jagged red lines. By the time I reached the ICU, my tracker was useless. I scanned checkpoint 4, but the screen flashed red, displaying a single message: "Wrong night." The words pulsed, mocking me. The ICU was a cavernous space, its ceiling lost in shadows, the remains of old medical equipment scattered like bones. A single fluorescent light flickered above, buzzing at a pitch that made my teeth ache. The air was thick with that metallic blood smell, and now I saw why. dark stains marred the floor, too fresh to be from years ago, forming patterns that looked deliberate, like runes. I wasn't alone. The squeaking shoes were back, circling me now, joined by more giggles, a chorus of them, echoing from every corner. My flashlight died, completely plunging me into near darkness, the flickering fluorescent above my only guide. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision, small, childlike shapes that vanished when I tried to focus. One shadow lingered longer, standing at the far end of the room, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It raised a hand, pointing to a door I hadn't noticed before, unmarked, its paint chipped and peeling. I didn't want to go near it, but the giggles were closing in, the shadows pressing closer. The door creaked open on its own, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. The air from below was colder, carrying a damp, earthy scent like a grave. My radio crackled again, the child's voice louder now. "You're late, Mr. Watchman. They're waiting." I had no choice. I descended, each step echoing like a hammer on stone. The staircase seemed endless, the walls narrowing until they brushed my shoulders. The drawings followed me down, scratched directly into the concrete now, the eyeless children growing larger, their hands more desperate. At the bottom was another door, this one wooden, warped with age, its surface carved with the same Watchman scrawl, repeated hundreds of times. Beyond the door was a basement I'd never been told about. A vast chamber lit by candles arranged in a spiral on the floor. The flames didn't flicker, burning steady and blue, casting eerie shadows that danced without rhythm. In the center of the spiral stood a small bed, identical to the ones upstairs, but this one was occupied. A figure lay beneath the blanket, small and still, its chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Around the bed, more shadows gathered, dozens of them, childlike but wrong, their forms shifting like smoke. I approached, my legs moving against my will. The blanket was thin, almost translucent, revealing the outline of a child, but its face was hidden. As I reached out, the candles flared, their light blinding. The projector from the playroom was here now, impossibly, its beam cutting through the dark to show me again, this time lying on the bed, my own face pale and lifeless, eyes closed. The shadows giggled louder, their voices merging into a single, deafening hum. I stumbled back, tripping over something soft, a stuffed bear, its one eye staring up at me. The bear hadn't been there a moment ago. I scrambled to my feet, but the room was changing. The walls were closing in, the candles multiplying, their blue flames climbing higher. The figure on the bed sat up, the blanket falling away to reveal nothing, no face, no form, just a void where a child should be. It pointed at me and the shadows surged forward, their hands cold as they grabbed my arms, my legs, pulling me toward the bed. I fought, screaming, but my voice was gone, swallowed by the hum. The projector flickered, now showing me walking the corridors, checking checkpoints night after night, an endless loop of shifts that never ended. I saw other guards too, their faces blurred, each one dragged into this basement, each one becoming part of the hospital's cycle. The children weren't patients. They were the hospital, its hunger given form, needing a watchman to keep the lights on, to keep the beds filled. I don't know how long I struggled. Time doesn't work right down here. My tracker stopped at midnight, its screen cracked. My flashlight is gone, but I don't need it anymore. The candles never go out. I make my rounds now every night, checking rooms where the children wait. They giggle when I pass, their hands brushing my skin, cold and insistent. The drawings are everywhere, my face among them now, eyeless, with Watchman written in my own handwriting. Sometimes I see a new guard enter the wing, clipboard in hand, their flashlight beam unsteady. I try to warn them, whispering through the static of their radios, but they never listen. The hospital doesn't let them. It needs its watchmen, and the children are always waiting.